the biggest human involvement we have, which I think is an important involvement, we do have some pretty fantastic chefs that are in our mix that help design our recipes. There's end of the day, there's a limitation to what this machine can do, but what we're not limited to is uh, how we source our ingredients and the quality of the ingredients and the quality of our sauces, and making sure that the impact of this machine's limitation is not limited to the greatness of the food that we produce. So elements of molecular gastronomy come into our creation of our sauces. So all that talented work of a chef, which I think is the right talent to deploy, is the creation of the recipes and then coming up with product innovation. But on the science part, this is where it gets really interesting. So a machine does all this hardware robotic stuff, but it's also controlled by programming. The programming does numerous things for us. It not only monitors the performance of the machine at any given moment in time, it's remotely monitored. It can be fixed remotely in many cases, but also in terms of food traceability. So every time an ingredient silo is put inside the machine, it scans a barcode. It knows exactly what the traceability requirements of the food is.
Hello, food enthusiasts from the FutureFoodCast. We're so glad that you've tuned in today. We have a treat for you. I'm Pam Leinmiller, and I'm going to be your host for this interview with Nipun Sharma. He is the CEO of SJW Robotics. And wait until you hear what they have going on. First of all, let me welcome you.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for the wonderful welcome. I'm really excited to be on the show. I've heard lots about it, and I've listened to some of the podcasts. I'm excited to be a part of it.
Well, wait until our audience hears. They're going to be excited that you are a part of it, because you have a lot of innovation going on. You know, FutureFoodCast, one of our missions is that we really want to bring to our audience the trends and the innovations that are going on to take advantage of those trends, as well as some of the challenges that are happening in the food industry. And you are right in the middle of several of those. First of all, the trends and innovation. Your innovations are great. Tell us about your robotics company and what you're doing there.
All right. So SJW Robotics, we started the company about 2.5 years ago. And really the origin was to solve a problem that I had with one of my restaurants. In particular, a concept that I'd created for a grocery store chain, a restaurant inside the grocery store chain. And the conundrum I had was I knew that labor had been a problem for a long time in our industry. I know COVID pretty much made the news obvious to everybody, but this was creeping up to us for a good decade past. And I realized one of my stations in the kitchen was going to be extremely hard to find employment for. And it happened. We put out job postings for many months. We didn't even get a single response, let alone finding somebody that wasn't very good. And this happened to me in my workstation. And we knew that it would be a challenge, and we went into it hoping to find a solution from other robotic companies in the universe. So we contacted numerous companies to see what's going on in food automation. Companies all over the world had some kind of tinkerings, and we tried to see if some of those could fit our needs. And then we came to a conclusion that a lot of these are really far away from servicing what we need in the restaurant business. We need high volume, we need high speed to make food, and automation that can respond to that complex question. So we took matters into our own hands, and we partnered up with some of the top robotic engineers and created something called RoWalk, a robotic walk system. So what started as filling a small need, automating a component of the restaurant operations, it evolved into something pretty special, and it became a fully autonomous standalone restaurant with 0 on-site employees. And I'm happy to say that that quest came to an important milestone on December 7th. We had a demo day. We invited customers and investors and everybody, and a lot of people from the media, to come see this machine. And you can see it behind in my Zoom call. It's a standalone restaurant where you go, you order your food, you on your phone, on the touchpad, and it cooks made-to-order meals for you. This particular model focuses on Asian cuisine. That means anything to do with noodles and rice and curry-based dishes and pad thais and Singapore noodles and what have you. And it's made to your order, made to your specs, and it's delivered and made in about a minute for you to pick up and eat.
That is so much information. I'd like to unpack a little bit of that because I want to get into actually the technology, which is so innovative within your product. But let's back up just a little bit to the very beginning and what caused you to start on this robotic entrepreneurial journey, because you have a rich history in the food industry as a chef and in restaurants, correct? You have run restaurants and you were having trouble with the people and staffing, which is a big problem that we're having now with restaurants. Is that what initially got you started?
Absolutely. So, I've been in the business for about 18 years now, and I've literally run concepts ranging from steakhouses to vegan concepts and everything in the middle. So I've done Asian, Middle Eastern, Indian, smoothie concepts, coffee chains, steakhouses, you name it, I've done it all. And I'm not a chef personally, but every time I take over a concept, I go in the heart of the business, the kitchen. How do I make my kitchens more efficient, smaller, requires less expertise, less food wastage, better food quality, better food consistency? How do we do all that stuff? So, part of my research has been to look at innovation in the kitchen side of the business worldwide, and how can I apply some of these metrics to our business? And having done so many concepts, and I've expanded chains across Canada, across the world, I take best practices from one concept, and when I take over the next concept, I try to see if I can, use that information to make my next project better and more efficient. At one point, you hit a wall, because at that point, it's the human factor. You see, the way we design our kitchens, we design it around, I wouldn't say weakness, but limitations of a human body. How tall is a typical person in a kitchen? How do we design a kitchen where they can work without hurting themselves? And accommodating the inefficiencies of the human body. So if my human being was 12 feet tall, Arnold Schwarzenegger, 18 arms and 8 heads, I would design my kitchen differently. So when we looked at the problem in the kitchen, we didn't see how do we duplicate the movement of a human being. We said, okay, here's the raw materials, here's the finished product. How do we go from A to B in the most efficient way possible? So how do we eliminate that limiting factor of using a human being for an inspiration? So that's where we sort of started the project. And you're right, our problem was labor. Labor was, over the years, in my almost 2 decades in the business, sometimes it was hard to find in certain areas. Sometimes the quality was not great. Sometimes the reliability wasn't great. And the trends have changed. And I think the last decade or more, and certainly in some parts of the world, and I'm talking pretty much every country, you've started to sense in the bones that something is off. This is a problem that's not going away. It's just becoming bigger and bigger. I equated to running a blockbuster video store in the Netflix world. We know something is wrong. We try to patch it to get to the next day. But I think the business cycles have shrunk so much. Things that used to take a generation to unfold can happen in a couple of years. And so that thing has been happening in the industry. We were feeling it. So that was the reason why we looked into it. And that's how we approached the technology to deliver on that promise.
I think what I'm hearing really differentiates your project from prior projects, because people have tried to automate cooking and what happens in the kitchen before, but you used your wealth of knowledge in different concepts and different restaurant models. You were improving as you went along. The things that worked best, you were taking with you to try to incorporate into the next project, is part of what I heard. But then the second thing is, you're not trying to just duplicate the human movement, because that in itself really is not necessarily the most efficient way to get from the raw food to the end product. You said you hired a robotics firm to act, or an engineering firm to actually go through. So tell us a little bit about the process of coming up with this autonomous unit.
So my situation was a bit unique because I didn't really plan to do so many different kind of concepts. It just so happened, range between quick service to fine dining to family dining chains and everything in the middle. So it was just a coincidence. My background was varied, and I'm not a chef, but I make sure the restaurants that I run deliver the best food imaginable. So my approach was always different because I was sort of the outsider. My career started in investment banking and private equity, so not really food related. I had never worked in a restaurant in my life prior to the first one that I started. So I learned the things the hard way. But when I met the engineers, so my partner in the business, Brian Walker, He has been for 21 years leading the robotics and automation for Magna International, an automotive parts manufacturer, one of the largest in the world. And his entire life has been about robotics and automation for the automotive industry. So it was all about how do we make things move, connect, how do we use sensors, how do we use autonomous movement to make different things come together. And Ryan is completely removed from the food and restaurant industry as it gets. So his world was different, his view was different. So when I was making sketches for Ryan, how would I design a kitchen? As I design many different kind of kitchens, where's the bottleneck? Where do I need automation? And so I'd sketched out in my head what this could be like, but I needed an engineer to validate that. So for Brian, this was very easy because this is far less complicated than what we do in the automotive industry, and this is how I would enhance this sketch of yours. So as we went down that rabbit hole, we came up with something we thought was pretty special. I couldn't believe it. For me, it was magic, and for Brian, it was Tuesday. And so then when we finished that, we filed for some patents. We went on a search for the right engineering company to partner with us to make our phase 1 prototype. And we stumbled upon this amazing company that really specializes in automation and robotics for large-scale food manufacturing and the pharmaceutical industry. So they understand what it takes for electrical certification, HVAC requirements, plumbing requirements, what it takes to run machines and equipment in different parts of the world, and have the certifications in place to be allowed to cook food in different parts of the world. So having that depth of knowledge and having that into our design from day one, we weren't making something that may or may not work. We were producing something that will work from people that have done it for a combined experience of hundreds of years, and putting that level of sophistication in our team on an engineering and robotics standpoint with my sort of functional knowledge of what the kitchen of the future could be like. So this coincidental team, I think, was what helped us deliver on this project.
Well, it sounds like you sought out the experts for each of the pieces that you were putting together, and the restaurant experience or cooking experience wasn't the most important part of that. It was the knowledge of because you wanted to bring in efficiency, you wanted to eliminate the human element for the staffing issues that you were having, and you want to rely on that to be able to deliver the product continuously. And you also wanted to maximize your food usage while you be efficient with that and not have the food waste, minimize your food waste, and try to use all that you had. Can you tell us how the insides work a little bit? It's so interesting to think about just walking up to something and ordering a meal that would be in a wok. So tell me how that would work.
You touched upon an important point. As we were not retrofitting an existing restaurant and being constrained by what that means, we thought if we had to start from scratch, what would the restaurant for the next generation, a quick service restaurant, look like? It was important for us to have carbon neutrality and sustainability as a key component of this business. It was important for us to have food safety and food traceability a key component of this. So when you're starting from scratch, it's easier, I think, in many ways to develop your wish list as opposed to coming and retrofitting an existing old school business. So the whole process is quite simple if you think about it. So it's divided into really 3 components: food storage, food manipulation, and food cooking. And so the first part is the refrigerated part. This is where all the ingredients are stored. That's your broccoli, your chicken, your onions. It's been pre-cut to the specs like any restaurant would typically get from a food service supplier. And this is where it's stored. And this is monitored very carefully in terms of when the shelf life of the product ends, what is the total volume of food sitting inside, and how it is dispensing accurately by whatever recipe that's programmed. So we're agnostic in terms of what recipe anybody would like, what personalization people would want in their meals. So these containers, and we've developed some pretty interesting patterns on how to dispense all these ingredients perfectly accurately. So whenever an order is placed, so part 1 is where all your protein and your vegetable gets dispensed automatically from this dispensing auger system. Then it goes down the line and it collects the starch. That could be your noodles, or it could be your rice in this particular case. And then that food, which is quite cold in temperature, it passes through a steam tunnel to bring the temperature up so it gets ready for cooking. Meanwhile, the woks, I call them woks because they have inspiration from the wok-based cooking. Wok, to me, are one of the most interesting pieces of equipment ever made, because the way you sizzle the food up in a wok, it bathes in its own vapors and it hits carbon steel at 400 degrees. You have this amazing sizzling, fresh pad thai that's being cooked for you. So we use the principles and the materials of a wok, but we created our own wok-based drum system that does a lot of the same impact of a wok, but of course minus a human being. So this is the wok where, again, a typical pad thai would start with oil being dropped in a really hot wok, and the wok's, instead of a human hand, the wok is spinning, rotating, and revolving, and then it gets the egg dispensed into it. Meanwhile, the food from the food tunnel comes in, it joins the rest of the ingredients inside the wok. It gets sprayed with all the different sauces that are required for this particular recipe. It cooks, it tumbles, it twists and turns, and it deposits all that stuff into a bowl. The bowl moves forward, it gets sealed, and it goes in a cubby where you tap your phone, pick up your bowl, you're on your way. Meanwhile, the wok system starts this self-cleaning process. It cleans itself with high pressure steam and other food grade sort of solutions, and it gets back into the cooking cycle. So any given moment in time, we have 6 of these woks working concurrently, which allows us to give a pretty high throughput and give us to 60 to 70 meals an hour.
Well, I need one of them cooking for me right now, because you're making me really hungry talking about all this great fresh food and these recipes of the pad thai. It's a fantastic concept, and now you have actually a working unit, which is very exciting. You had mentioned that early on. Another thing that you talked about in there was the accuracy. The food prep happens just like any other restaurant. However, the accuracy of the measuring to go into the particular recipe, even if you have a human doing that, there's a lot of errors being made there and a lot of food waste, or you're serving too much or not enough of any particular ingredient. But this system ensures that you're getting exactly what the recipe calls for. And you talked about knowing what food is in there at any given time. And how does that work as far as refilling it or knowing when you're almost out?
Oh, absolutely. So, the biggest human involvement we have, which I think is an important involvement, we do have some pretty fantastic chefs that are in our mix that help design our recipes. End of the day, there's a limitation to what this machine can do. But what we're not limited to is how we source our ingredients and the quality of the ingredients and the quality of our sauces, and making sure that the impact of this machine's limitation is not limited to the greatness of the food that we produce. So elements of molecular gastronomy come into our creation of our sauces. So all that talented work of a chef, which I think is the right talent to deploy, is the creation of the recipes and then coming up with product innovation. But on the science part, this is where it gets really interesting. So a machine does all this hardware robotic stuff, but it's also controlled by programming. The programming does numerous things for us. It not only monitors the performance of the machine at any given moment in time, it's remotely monitored. It can be fixed remotely in many cases, but also in terms of food traceability. So every time an ingredient silo is put inside the machine, it scans a barcode. It knows exactly what the traceability requirements of the food is. And as we go down the inventory, there's a couple of interesting things that come in. First, when the inventory is running low, the operator will be notified to, refill our chicken or refill the onions. So it's managed very, very accurately. Because we know the shelf life issues, we can actually do a number of things with that. We can self-generate promotions. Chicken pad thai 50% off because chicken's expiring next day. So the inventory management becomes pretty sophisticated if we add AI and data science to it. We start monitoring regional preferences in food, or we know how to adjust the recipes. We know the events that are taking place in the environment that could impact the food inventory. For example, in a busy airport in Christmas season, you better get ready for high volume of food. If there's a storm, nobody's going to be at the airport, so maybe marketed that way. On the street level, we know that sporting games or concerts, construction, a storm in Florida can triple your price of tomatoes. Maybe we don't sell tomatoes tomorrow. So when you get really, really efficient with managing the information flow and feeding that in real time to learn at the machine level, we really take away the limitations of human beings making guesses. A lot of food wastage happens because of our inability to accurately assess what's happening in the environment and manage our inventory this way.
Right. In the traditional, what you just said, in the traditional restaurant environment, the ordering and projections of what usage is going to be is usually done by a human. But in this situation, you've gone to the next level and you can have some of those impacts calculated in to what you think the future, or what the unit thinks the future usage is going to be. And I'm sure that will improve over time as you're able to prove out the concept and fine tune what inputs you want the computer to have in order to make these decisions, right? The other thing that you said, which is really interesting to me, is that when something might be running low, you use the chicken as an example, you know that the code date, or well, it could be running low, or the code date is really the example you used, coming up maybe the next day or within 48 hours. And so you can run a special on that and use up. And so you're not going to waste that raw material product, which is different than, that doesn't always happen with the human element in there. And I just love how you've really just taken some of the decision making to the next level. The other thing I heard you say in the process when you were explaining that was how easy it is for the person, they're ordering and it's ready and they just swipe their phone. So the payment methods you're offering, what are those?
So in terms of operations, we've pretty much taken the technology that a typical quick service restaurant would do. Of course, QR codes became popular because of COVID, but we'll have that as an option if you don't want to come too close to the machine. Each machine will have at least 2 big touchpads, so you can order from there directly. You can order from your phone, an app, website, and street location. You can actually order from third-party aggregators, be it Uber Eats or Skip or whatever is popular, because all that communicates down into our central ordering platform. So it communicates directly with the machine. So when you place your order, again, it doesn't matter if it's coming from Uber, if it's coming from your phone, if it's coming from the machine, you get to customize it, choose it. You can tell it when you want it picked up. So it'll start cooking it when you arrive. So in an airport, that becomes interesting. It's closer to your gate, and we can use many ways to make sure that the food starts getting prepared for when you want to have it picked up. So the technology, I'm happy to say that not our proprietary, because a lot of these things already exist in quick service, and I've been using them in my other restaurants. So really robust platforms that integrate with our computer that's inside the machine. So that was the easy part, surprisingly.
Well, it sounds like you made it very open. It's more of an open platform. You're not making it a proprietary situation where you can only order from your app and directly to your ROWOK. And that's ROWOK, correct? For our audience that might want to look this up and see where you're going to be next. But yeah. I really like that. People are used to, like you said, there's a lot more going on with the order at home or the touchless food delivery situation, and like the Uber Eats or others, and you're taking advantage of that, or you're just folding into that system that's already in there instead of making this a brand new thing that somebody has to learn. It's going to be so easy for them to just assimilate. You talked about different locations, and you talked about street level, airport, different store. What are the requirements for your unit as far as location?
Yeah, so that was the other interesting thing. We took inspiration from food trucks and RVs as a starting point. How do we make this real estate agnostic? The 2 things that really kill a restaurant is rent and labor costs. That's about 50%, occupancy costs and labor. And the amount of money it takes to construct a restaurant. You might have your profitability in EBITDA, but you have a bank loan that's taking all of that for the next 5 to 7 years. So I'm like, how do we take away those protocols? It takes a long time to negotiate leases. You have to be in the right place. The right place costs way too much money, both in terms of construction and rent. So when we looked at labor, we're like, what's the other inefficiency in the system that we can tackle? So we designed this with the principles of a food truck, which can be pretty much parked anywhere, right? So we're like, how do we make this flexible? So how do we put restaurants in places where restaurants couldn't traditionally go? How do we optimize usage of real estate? And I don't have to worry about negotiating and finding the right space or the right place. We can be anywhere. So we can be in a parking lot, we can be in a corridor of a building, we can be in a university, hospital, office towers, and can't give names out, but electric car companies that would love to have this in charging stations. Some of them are in remote locations. Our biggest requirement, Pam, is electricity. So that is a symbiotic relationship. So it's a plug-and-play system. So we designed this to be very modular for 2 reasons. One is that this is a big machine. It's about 13 feet long, 7 feet tall, and 4 feet deep. And to move it through a regular building door could be challenging. So it comes in parts and gets assembled inside. The modularity allows us to outsource certain production as well. But it gives us flexibility to get into any real estate. And all we would require at that point is a plumbing connection, electrical requirement, but the machine would be self-supporting at that point. The other advantage of having that approach is, for whatever reason, we pick a wrong location, and I will just move it to another one. So when you pick a bad location for a restaurant, you're pretty much done. Here we can just put the wheels on and just slide it over to the next place that better suits our needs. So yeah, so that's sort of the origins of our requirements in real estate. Is pretty much can go anywhere.
And I like the idea that it's modular too, because you can, like you said, that gives you some flexibility as far as sourcing your products to put this together and where you want that done. And then you can bring all that together, and also moving it. You can move it in the parts, like you said, which is much easier to do than thinking about having to put the whole unit on some kind of big truck and get it to where it needs to be. But that flexibility, Nipun, that gives you the ability to really, your market is pretty much open. You can be anywhere. They could rent you for a big fair that might be going on, just like they would have a food truck there. Or you could be a fixture in an office building, or like you mentioned, an airport. I've been through the airport during the pandemic where none of the restaurants are open. I was so glad I had a food bar in my bag, because the restaurants were all closed down, and that was a people problem and also the pandemic problem. But this would eliminate that. You could still have a product like this, a station like this, the self-contained, and so there's no AC or heat or any of those environmental concerns. You don't need to worry about any of that.
No, it's fully self-contained. And if you think about airports, a lot of the airports have the designated, food court kind of environments, which are not necessarily convenient or close to your gate. So oftentimes you make a choice to just sit close to your gate so you can just board your plane. What if this was right in front of you? So we don't have to limit ourselves to being in that food court. And again, you have to be in that food court because of what you just mentioned, the HVAC requirements, the plumbing requirements are very specific. How do you take care of all the air and jettison all that stuff out? So you can't just put that in every corner of the airport. So this is self-contained. We have self-contained HVAC has been around for a while for certain ovens that can be flexible, so you don't have to have everything under the hood of a kitchen. So that these self-contained equipment allowed kitchens to become a bit more flexible in design. So Borrowed stole that idea from some of the other self-contained HVAC systems and said we can just apply that over here. So that means there's no problems of odors, external evacuation of air. All that remains fully compact, and job of the operator is to change the air filter like every 30 days, that kind of stuff.
Sure. Just the general maintenance that would be normal for any kind of food production facility. Let me ask you a couple of questions about the front end of really the supply chain of your food. Do you have you talked about the traceability of the food once it gets in and you know what's in there and what the code date is and all of that. But what about on the front end getting to you? What about traceability there?
So, I've been in the chain restaurant business for a long time, and increasingly, I think most chains, especially bigger chains, they use partners that have those capabilities in place. And traceability is taken on another level thanks to blockchain, where things are becoming more tight. So there's lesser reason for people to have fake, fish is a big one. It could be something that's not exactly what you think it is, but it tastes very similar. The traceability allows a lot of interesting things. It does impact inventory management and everything else we've talked about, and product innovation. So that is not our expertise, but we would make sure that we procure food from people that have those tick marks for us. For us, traceability is important, and we know which partners provide that in the restaurant landscape. What's also important for us is sustainability, both in terms of the raw materials that we buy for the food. It's a choice that operators get to make. The materials that we use for the bowls that people use, and also materials that we use for the construction of this machine. Not to mention the water consumption and everything else that's happening inside this place is We're aiming for carbon neutrality. We're pretty close to it because we don't have the inefficiencies of a typical restaurant system. A typical wok system, for example, has a continuous flow of water throughout the day as long as the restaurant's operating. We don't have that flow. So just on that level alone, we don't use water the way a typical restaurant does. We don't use electricity, and we don't emit fumes like a typical restaurant does.
Those are such big pluses in the positive column for this whole concept. And what about the packaging? I think you also probably are concerned about sustainability and minimum usage and all of that with your packaging as well, right?
100%. We're using perishable packaging. It was tough for the machines to be able to incorporate that. It's easier on a restaurant level. It's easier to pick up plastic when you're moving things around a system like this. But that was a challenge for engineers to make sure of that. So yeah, from utensils to raw materials to packaging, everything sort of had to have a check mark. So again, it's in many ways easier because we're starting from scratch. So we could design bowl holders based on what's available in the market that meets our needs. So we really went back to the basics to start from scratch.
Yeah. Well, you are definitely a forward thinker, and I'd really like to hear what your future thoughts are about where this concept might take the food industry. What do you really hope happens here?
I think there's something to be said for the demand for functional food. Increasingly, people cook less. We love our deliveries. We love our cooking shows. We don't necessarily cook at home. And our taste palettes have expanded exponentially over the years. Something that used to be niche one generation ago is, Tuesday lunch for most people. I'm talking people all ages. And the thing I've been seeing is, I was born and raised in India, and I finished my university in Canada. I spent a big part of my professional life in the US and in Europe, spent a lot of time in Asia. From what I've been seeing since I was in high school to today, every country was very unique. Now it's hard for me to differentiate which Starbucks I'm in because increasingly all the countries are similar. We all eat identical foods everywhere, and I've opened restaurants in the Middle East to corners of the US to Europe, and the trends are very, very similar. We're evolving because of, I guess, Instagram. We like the same things and we have some of the same sensibilities. So in terms of taste palettes, I think the trends are continuously going to be exciting because we've expanded our palettes. What I do see from my perspective is the environmental component. And I think that will be an important trend. And that goes beyond just, meatless vegetarian options. It's also the biodiversity on our planet. If restaurants are following one trend like quinoa and disrupting the ag business with just that one trend worldwide, that's impacting indigenous populations, impacting biodiversity. So the responsibility of restaurants to follow trends blindly without taking into consideration the impact of the environment, I think that will become tighter over time. And I think while we expand our palates and taste buds, the impact of the environment will become more considerable because I think the options are better. It's easier to find these things out. Again, thanks to blockchain, thanks to so much technology, thanks to ag tech, the advancement in agricultural technology. My perspective was this is happening in great ways, not my expertise. I'm stuck in the restaurant, farm to fork. I'm the fork here. And a lot of the inefficiencies happen at the fork level. How do we make the fork part of that ecosystem in the back? In my view, I see functional food becoming more accessible by automation. I think when we go out to restaurants, it's to celebrate, it's to be with friends and family and coworkers. But when you want to grab a quick bite and run with it or have it while an office conference call, those components of the industry, I think will be fully autonomous in less than a generation, 100%, because it needs to deliver on quality and it needs to deliver on value. I'm not looking for an experience for my fast food restaurant. I just need the great food and give it to me at a great price. If I want an experience, I want to enjoy it and celebrate somewhere, then I want to go to a nice restaurant and go there. I think the problem with the quick service universe was they were focusing on experience, and then cloud kitchens came by. And people said, I want great food, I want great value, and the traditional industry cannot deliver on value.
Not only that, but the value is great because we didn't even talk about all the fresh ingredients you use, which is another demand that is out there from the consumer marketplace, really across the world. Everyone is trying to figure out how to eat better, more healthy, and food that tastes good at the same time, which is what I hear you delivering. Is there anything else you'd like to tell our audience before we end up today?
I think everybody has to deliver on good quality ingredients. I don't think fast food restaurants, they're trying to get away from that name because the implication was the ingredients were not good. But I think every restaurant, every fast food chain has evolved and is delivering on a consumer expectation of traceable food, high quality ingredients. But you see a typical restaurant, the food is only about 25 to 30% of the cost. And so while we can all deliver on that value, it's the inefficiencies in the system that don't deliver value. My 50% of my costs are rent and labor. That 50% is up for grabs. And I think the people that can reduce that 50% to near zero can give you food for significantly less than you're paying today as the consumer, while everybody's better off and deliveries become profitable. So I think that ecosystem is under watch. That's what we're trying to accomplish. And we want to make sure customers get incredible value. So I think quick service industry's job is everything you said about high quality ingredients, but how do we make sure we give it at the right price? And hopefully, there'll be some answers within the next few years. There'll be some really, really great answers, I think.
Well, I think here you are, Nipun Sharma with SJW Robotics, showing up at an inopportune time, at a perfect time to have this footprint with the Robotic, and I'm excited that I had the opportunity to be on the front end of this product. And what I see is a little bit of an evolution and revolution within the food industry. I really appreciate you being with the Future Foodcast today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Pam. It was really enjoyable talking to you, and look forward to hearing more from you guys.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.